Hey everyone, welcome to the very first episode of Counter Stream. I'm Noor Hariri and I'm excited to be here today with my co-host Juliana Zito. I'd like to start with a few words about this show. Counter Stream will focus on the stories, the issues, the perspectives that are often get overlooked or dismissed by mainstream media, whether it's environmental issues, political undercurrents, or the big ideas shaping our society and world today. So we will try here to bring those news that doesn't always make the headlines. And in today's show, we will be tracking some of the big issues that took place in last October, including, for example, the recent floods caused by, for example, Hurricane Milton, and how global warming is making extreme weather events like these more common. And we will be talking, of course, about the US elections, scientific, new technological and scientific advancements, and as I said, the floods and the communications, and how the communication world is adapting to these new challenges. How are you doing, Liliana?
I'm super excited. We have spent some time looking at the past month, as you said, news, but also news that are not so big in our media. So I'm really excited to talk about these things. And of course, we will have also a guest today. She is in DM since 2016. She went from a theater producer to being an activist and involved in politics for the past 8 years. Welcome to our new show as our first guest, Ivana Nenadovic. Are you excited as we are?
I am, and anxious as well because it's such a big responsibility to be the first guest. I've been in DM for a very long time, since 2016, and I've seen phases of growth and change and so on. So definitely I can talk about that perspective. And my previous life was in theater, yes.
How does it compare to politics? I know we talked about it. You said there's also politics in the theater world, right?
Absolutely, because theater should be the mirror of the society and challenge what we see as the audience or as a regular people, because the regular people go to the theater. Theater should be provocative, should be offensive, as it's very controversial today. It should make you laugh. Satire, what satirical pieces were also a way of speaking up and speaking out in times when that is not really allowed. Theater was my bubble. It was my safe space where borders, languages, any kind of that differences are good. The stage is the ultimate space of freedom. So you can watch a performance in basically any language and still understand the emotions. Through the theater, I understood world better. I was born in Yugoslavia, and when I was 13 years old, the wars started. I'm saying wars because it was like one continuous war for like 10 years. So I started very early to be an activist. So maybe that's the first thing that came in my life. I remember when the first demonstrations, pro-peace demonstrations and demonstrations against Slobodan Milosevic's regime. I was 13 and I couldn't go by myself, obviously. So I asked my father to take me, and he did. He took me to that protest. And only a couple of years later, maybe when I was 15, I started going on my own with my friends to these protests. And that's what shaped me. Being a pacifist and crying for peace instead of taking any sides, this was already embroidered in me. And then, kind of naturally, because again, my mother and father come from that world, I leaned towards theater. And it was also a way to discover different worlds and overcome these borders and boundaries and stigmatizations that come with wars. During the 90s, Serbia was under sanctions for 10 years. And those sanctions were meant to hurt the regime and the government, but those sanctions didn't hurt them at all. They were hurting the regular people who were protesting against that regime. Yes, the regime, and yes, the bloody war, and yes, the awful propaganda that was coming from that camp, but with very little support for progressives, as we call them today, for people who were against that, who were firmly standing for these values of peace and unity and not breaking the country, families, and making a bloody civil war. And in hindsight, we can also see the same scenario happening from Iraq, Iran, Syria, Afghanistan. These wars are actually very much enabled from the outside. There is a reason why that is needed at some point. I was then in the theater for 20 years. While I was studying, I was working as a hostess at the wardrobe and, checking your ticket, showing your seat. But that was the way for me to watch all of the performances at the National Theater in Belgrade, which also has drama department, ballet, and opera. So talking about no borders in terms of language or anything, watching ballet, which has no words, but you still understand the storyline and feel the emotion. Same thing with opera. Opera might not be your thing really, but when you watch a couple of them as well, you can be moved just by the music and not understanding a word of it. Also within the theater, working with different layers of the society, so to say, because National Theater is a huge factory with 600 people employed. So from technicians, maintenance, administration, the elites, the management that are always there, and they are appointed by the Ministry of Culture, which is, of course, part of the government. So National Theater is a government theater, right? It's funded by the government. Therefore, there are certain limitations how far you can go in your activism, although it's a free society and we are free to do anything. But when there were protests against this current government, which is in place for 12, 13 years already, I would write stuff on my Facebook. And then my colleagues would tell me, you could just calm down a little bit. I'm not going to do that because it's my wall. I'm going to write on my wall whatever I want. Also, over the time, the union of actors and other supporting staff, we revived a union basically because unions were highly attached already with political parties and therefore trying to maintain the status quo and not really to change anything. And the change was necessary in terms of better conditions of work at the theater. In 2018, it was an anniversary, a big one, 150 years since the foundation of the National Theater. The general manager at that time was not conducting the business properly. So the Union of the Actors and Supporting Staff, which I was already part of, decided to make a warning strike. It's not a proper strike, but it's just like 1 hour before performance. And of course, because they are actors and because they are celebrities, they had to draw the attention of the press. And it went to the media in a way that I never expected. And it lasted for a very long time, thanks to the fact that they are famous, not so much because of the theater, but because of TV, because those same actors act in movies, in these TV series that everybody watches. People felt this attachment with actors that would come to TV and say, We don't have warm water in our wardrobes. We have to take from home the makeup removal and cotton buds. It was shocking because when you come as an audience to the National Theatre, which is all glamorous and in gold, in Baroque style, and you see your favorite actors, and then you hear her talk about the backstage and that she brings her own makeup removal, it really surprised, it shocked people. And that's just one small portion of what was falling apart. So it lasted for a month. And in that period of time, the president of the union resigned. The union elected me as a president. So I led this little revolution that we had. After it was ended, the general manager resigned. So it was a bittersweet victory because he did leave as a result of our rebellion. A different person, but from the same camp came. So it again proves a point that you won't make any changes just changing the name, talking about any elections. If you just pick a different person from the same pot, you will get the same results, or this, some things will be a little bit better, but it won't be different. After another year at the National Theatre, I basically suffered the consequences of this union leadership, and also the space for me in DM opened.
We are lucky to have you. Let's go into our topics today. I think it's interesting because the viewers will know from which point of view you're coming.
Yeah, I'd like first to thank Ivana for sharing her experience with us. Actually, it's very interesting to look how politics works, but from theater perspective, because then you realize, or you understand how institutions work, not directly, but indirectly, how places like theaters are institutionalized and politicized in different ways. So I thank you for sharing your experience with us. Regarding our topics today, we have different topics. I'd like to start with a topic that I'm not expert at, not in any way, but I'm very interested in because it concerns us all, which is what's happening in the natural realm, in the natural world. Natural disasters, natural catastrophes, we always think of them as separate from us. We are so much fixated on politics, which is absolutely important, and we think about nature as something separate. We don't relate to it because we have no control over it. We are just powerless, helpless. However, nature is not, as we all know today through science, that it is not very much disconnected from our political issues, political struggles. Of course, there are some natural disasters that are out of our controls. For example, 2 years ago, there was this earthquake that hit Syria and Turkey. Of course, that was a natural disaster. We could discuss it in political terms, in terms of how people faced it, how governments can protect people and things like that. However, there are other natural disasters in the world that are caused basically through and by politics. And if we look back at what happened in October 24th, last month, we witnessed a series of floods actually in different places in Europe, Bosnia, Valencia, France, Paris, Italy. And also in the US, we witnessed this huge catastrophic Hurricane Milton that hit Florida. And all these events have claimed lives and left behind a trail of destruction, actually. There are different types of floods in the world. Some kind of floods are uncontrollable. We cannot control them. However, there are some other kinds of floods, like the so-called flash floods. The flash floods are specific kinds of floods that are so rapid, they're so quick, so sudden, and they happen because of heavy rains. And, heavy rains connect to global warming because the increasing temperatures of Earth are connected to the heavy rains and to the rising levels of water levels. And all this is causing heavy rains. Year after year, the US is becoming having more moisture and becoming more wetter. All this is bringing more water. So this is, if we want to read what happened in the US, we can address two issues at the same time. The first issue is, of course, as I mentioned, global warming and how it affects the rainfall and how this causes these kind of floods, the flash floods. There are some agencies in the US that should take care about forecasting and predicting where these floods happen. We have this agency that is called FEMA, which is the agency that is responsible for the homeland security there. However, it's criticized over years because the maps that they have there are inaccurate. Is this just a coincidence over coincidence, or is this just somehow being overlooked intentionally? So that's one thing. So again, we have two issues we can address here. First, why there aren't enough policies to reduce or address these natural events. Second problem that can be politically discussed and addressed here is how are the governments reacting to these incidents? And do they have enough standards, policies to protect people? Do they have the so-called resilient standards to help people? It's a huge topic that can be addressed from different angles. As I said, the same things are happening in different places in the world. Not new, of course. There are other incidents we've just spoken about. The floods that happened in October, if we go back year after year, I can remember one that happened in Czech Republic last year, another, and there are so many, of course. The one thing also that is very saddening here is that people are not susceptible to these events equally on equal terms, because, of course, as we all know, the people who come from poor places in the world, I think, they are more affected because places that are urbanizing very quickly, on the one hand, or places that are overpopulated are more affected than other places. These are some of the points that I can bring here, and I don't know if you'd like to add a few things to this topic.
I think we also can play the video of Valencia, which is freshly in the minds of people. Yeah, there it is. I mean, how devastating. Imagine you're just there in your apartment and you're looking down the road, and I mean, it's not about the material. In my opinion, it's not even about the material damage. It's just you're dead scared for your life, right?
Yeah, I think that these videos, which are, of course, devastating, and they do affect people's lives. And yes, it's not about the material things, but when that passes, also real people, ordinary people, are left with the consequence, very often left on their own, because there are no policies, or there is some immediate response, usually from the community or international community, even, to help, but that's for that moment. And the longer consequence and the prevention of these floods, because we are talking about floods, is not being implemented. As Noir said, there are no policies, and governments are responding to these events as it's a natural catastrophe, or it's a result of the global warming, or both. So basically nobody is responsible. And the policies that are being invented are being discussed about in Davos and so on. The responsibility is further individualized, going in line with the capitalist system and this detachment from the community. That if I go vegan and if I go using the paper straw, I'm feeling this responsibility as individual, and it depends on me, which is in one small portion might be true. But on the other hand, I think that it's just diverting from much bigger picture, and from what is causing global warming and natural disasters, because it is very much linked, in my non-expert opinion. When we are talking about the floods that come after heavy rains, it's nature, and it happened before. I mean, it happened always, also when the snows start melting, and then those streams become very powerful and so on. But once upon a time, people knew how to live with the nature. Over the centuries, and especially at this peak of this civilization, I would say, people are very comfortable in their urban lives. Western urban lives, just to make it clear again, because other parts of Earth don't live so detached from the nature as the Western world does. It's a fact that nature engineering, or however it is called, exists. And we saw it a couple of months ago in Dubai. Why would they just do it in Dubai and not in other places? And also, that is a weapon. So why aren't we taking this into account, preventing the floods? And, with an expansion of urban areas, we came too close to rivers. I'm talking 500 meters from River Sava in Belgrade. We inhabited nature's natural place to spread. I'm living in New Belgrade. The prevention from the floods was built here when the whole area was built in the 70s, and it was done well. So when Sava is rising because of the rains, because of the snows melting and so on, it would never go over this hill, so to say, which is a prevention from the floods. In the last 30 years, especially since the collapse of Yugoslavia, because Yugoslav army was responsible for that, and they were renewing it and so on and so on. Nobody is responsible for that. There is a lot of illegal building in that area. So this hill, this protective hill, is being drilled for the electricity cables, for the water. Sewage is going straight into the river. There are these river coffee shops on the boats, which are great. I love them, but they also cause problems of such nature. We had a huge flood, similar like in the video that we saw in 2014. Everybody's low-key praying that we don't have that kind of flood here, because this prevention, which is 500 meters from where I am, is not going to be able to take all of the water as it used to be, because nobody is keeping it, and there are just no regulations who can drill through it. Also, with more concrete, there is less and less ground, like earth, to absorb the water. We have these heavy rains in summers and so on. It shouldn't cause a havoc, and it is. I think it's both policymakers putting it on individuals and making it work for themselves and their corporations and big businesses and so on. Nature engineering exists, whether we want to to admit it or not. Governments are just not responding because, again, it costs less. It's a gateway to corruption. I think, in general, that people should start living more with nature and not being so arrogant about conquering the nature, which is like the biggest achievement of the humanity in the last 100 or 200 years.
The rain that fell in Valencia was in 48 hours as much as it falls in a year. So that's immense, a lot of water. A lot of people made the mistakes because we saw the map. They thought it had something to do with the ocean and were like, yeah, why are people settling so close to the ocean? But it had nothing to do with the ocean. It was just the immense volume of water falling down. And this is what's interesting, because besides when it's in a country like Spain, where you cannot not mention it in the news, most isn't mentioned in the news. We talked about Bosnia flooding, which I knew through my mom because she reads the Serbian or Macedonian newspaper. So she was like, did you hear about Bosnia? And I was like, what's happening in Bosnia? Or other countries. So it's in parallel. I mean, we had France wasn't in the news cycle in Germany. I mean, I'm looking in the internet, like in social media, I'm scrolling and I'm seeing Paris underwater, and I'm like, that's fake. Then I look it up and it's not fake. How can I, like, you can see that this machinery of elitists, government, lobbyists are trying to keep all of these things as, to the minimum volume so that people don't connect the dots. Because if they would sensationalize those news as much as they do stupid shit, like if they would say another flood, oh my god, it's the 5th in the month, people would respond to it. They would go like, oh my god, it's the 5th flood. It was like a, a weird comparison, but you remember a few years ago when known famous pop stars would die and people would be another one, like it's something super unusual that people die when they're 80 or 90 or something. You can see that there is no seed sown in the minds of people to respond to natural disasters or to climate change. It's the opposite. You have a lot of conservative parties, you have a lot of lobbies, you have a lot of liberals who are simply don't want the change because big lobbies are behind them, like the car industry in Germany and so on, or even the oil industry. I mean, we will talk about Trump later, but one of the biggest highlights of his campaign was oil, 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 right? As he's a big oil fan. And he talks about climate change in terms of, well, I like environmental protection, but all those policies which, prevent me from building my super big buildings are annoying me. That's what he's saying, basically. I've never seen him respond to the actual climate change topic because his honest answer would be, I don't believe in it. Right? That would be his answer. And I think that a lot of politicians in power are acting, even in Europe. We have those who say, well, the Paris agreement and so on, and we're taking it seriously, but they don't. I feel like there's so many crises and so many economical crises that people are just scared of taking steps into the future, of even thinking about approaching life different, or renewable energy is scary because you have old industry. You can kind of have this in between time between old and new industries, where you don't really know what's happening with your job and so on, and you're scared that a lot of people will have no jobs and so on. So there is, I think, a general problem, and that we are kind of in a twilight zone between an old era and a new era, and it's really painful to watch in between, I guess.
For some reason, I think that people know what's happening, actually, and they just want to lie to themselves. Because actually, if you ask anybody, do you think that the nature is okay? They will tell that it's not okay, even if they don't know about this flood or that flood. If you tell it, the politics, is it okay with that? Whether is it going to be Trump or Harris, for example? They know that they both are lying in different ways. But the thing is, why people today know that the politics is lying and they're still following and buying these lies? Why are they sweeping everything that's happening in the world under the carpet? This is not important. This is just a flood that will not hit me. It hit somebody else now. And it's not important. What I think is even more important and more crucial here is that these topics are being demonized today. If we listen to people like Jordan Peterson and his new show and what they say every day, if you just mention environment or global warming, that's enough for them to label you as you are some crazy person. These topics are getting these very bad reputation because I don't know why they call it postmodernism, and they try to create names just to label these topics with bad and crazy names. And the problem here now, every time you mention anything regarding gender issue, reproduction laws, environment, it's enough for the other person to say, no, I don't want to listen to those people because they are repeating the same things over and over again. So I think it's a problem of ideology all the way along, and a problem of polarization. This person said that, now we have to respond to this person and create a smarter ideology, a smarter narrative to convince people. But at the end, the question is, all the people know what's happening. They just don't want to acknowledge it. I don't know how this can be solved. It's just like it needs to be at least addressed instead of just playing this game, or all the media, actually.
We are living in a very egotistical society. Let's be true about that. Like, individualism is taking so much. Just look at social media. It's all, I'm the main character bullshit. So people are not looking for the next 20 years. They don't care. They want to have now a good life. They want to now have a good holiday. And if the one place is flooded, they just travel to the other. You know what I mean? So it's, I think yes, it's ideology, but it's also just plain ignorance. It's just plain ignorance. I have 3 children, so I'm looking for the future because I know I want them to grow up and, have a life. Maybe if I hadn't had the children, maybe I would have also a slightly more ignorant view on things. Or let's say I would give up at some point. Maybe I would internally give up and be like, you know what? I don't care. So it's not even that you are egotistical as a character, but maybe you just don't have hope at some point. And I think that's a mixture. It's ignorance and egotism, and it's just plainly hopelessness. It's frustrating, yeah. But I think it's the society's mental state is just not right.
Adding one last thing to this is that, yes, maybe if I'm not directly impacted by what's happening, for example, in this place in the world or that place, or as you said, maybe if I don't have a child. But the thing is, you feel it in different places. I mean, for example, the prices are going up, the nature is going crazy, relationships, I don't know what, culture is, if you want just to look, you will find it there. And the thing is not, it's like everything is connected some way or another. We are all impacted, affected by this. The thing is, we choose to believe that this thing has to do with one context and not putting the big context, and putting the dots together and trying to see the big picture. But we have other topics, of course, to discuss today, and I want you, Juliana, maybe to help us go to the second topic we have to discuss today.
The next topic we have is also something that wasn't quite big in the media, although it is of concern to the western part of the world. There was some mentioning, but not that much. Of course, in October, there was a 16th BRICS summit held in Russia. It was a gathering of, I think, 30 leaders. It was very interesting because the topic of this event was strengthening multilateralism for just global development and security. It's a huge, I mean, it started with, basically the countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And now it's becoming bigger and bigger. And also their ambitions have changed. So they started as an economic alliance, but it transformed in something bigger, like a political, strategic bloc. And you can see also in their remarks that they're heavily criticizing EMF and the World Bank and wanting to transform those Western institutions. They have put out also a statement, I guess, this year about the UN Council that needs transformation, which we all know. I mean, their representation in these institutions is very biased. We know BRICS has been pushing the word multipolar world order a lot. They're having some pace. They have 13 countries wanting to enter the alliance now with everything that's happening, also with Ukraine and in Gaza, Lebanon, with Israel, also with the West more and more, losing its power, its political power, so to say. Not that it has loosed its grip on the world, but I mean, look at the US election. It's not very serious. It's a lot of people make fun of it. Biden hasn't been the strongest president, and Europe is essentially non-existent on the theater of the world. The European Union is kind of not a union. It's just a bunch of countries trying to work out a statement together, but not much on one page when it comes to anything, to security, to economy, anything. So I think there's a natural development that the global south has kind of momentum because a lot of these countries, all of the countries we've talked about from BRICS and even more members have been a huge victim of Western imperialism, colonization. So I think there is a natural development to things. But what I find interesting to talk about is not so much from the Western point of view, but also from the global South point of view. If this BRICS alliance is just bringing back some hope to people, because of course, from a Western perspective, we look at it. If you look at our media, they are trying to scare us of each of those countries. Every single one of those countries is scary to people in the West because of their leadership, because of their system. I mean, there are things to criticize for sure, also in terms of human rights. But I think that the narrative that gets pushed in the West doesn't match at all with the narrative that gets pushed like in the global south, and those two are like two different realities when you know what I mean. My question that I'm asking myself actually is, and I haven't been to any of those countries, to be honest. I haven't ever been in Russia or in China or in India, and the others. So I'm asking myself how it is from their perspective. Like, are they kind of being like, yeah, BRICS, great? Are they scared of this experiment? Because you can also be like, okay, the US will crush us for this if we ever have out to shake off the US dollar. Or do you believe that there's some excitement about this, that there is support in the people?
I would say here, coming from the Middle East, that people are divided. And since you know that there are some new members from the Middle East, I mean, I think Egypt was there in the last summit and other countries, I think. So the people are divided, actually. And I'm here, objectively speaking, some of them are excited, as you said. They think they have some hope that this would change something in the world order. On the other hand, you have people who are so pessimist and they think even if it changed, it would change to the worst. And that would cost us a lot more catastrophes financially, economically, and even politically. So there is this division. However, I might say, and from my readings and my impressions from what I read, that there is more enthusiasm than pessimism here. Again, because people are frustrated, they want to see some change. However, whether this change is real, whether this change is for their benefit or not, that's another question, of course. One thing can be added here, not from that perspective, from a Western perspective. Some of the articles that I read that coming from different critics criticizing the BRICS in general, they're saying that it's all about mere empty talk, symbolism without any concrete actions, which is true to some extent if we think about this currency they're talking about, because until this moment, this currency does not exist, and there's no any concrete action regarding even the financial and economic system. However, I think not overestimation, but also underestimating what's happening in there is also not good. Because even if we take their what the critics are saying, that even if this is just, as they say, symbolism, then it's not without meaning, because in the geopolitical realm, this means a kind of fragmentation of the world economic and financial system. It means something is moving, and the role of the US, since it's taking the most important significant role, it is shifting. This means something without putting so much expectation on it, but it means something, and it means something negatively. Seeing this does not mean that they are doing something right now, but it means that the world is changing economically speaking. And let's not overlook the role of China. Maybe in the future that would maybe become more clear for us.
I think that it's not that the world is changing just economically, geopolitically as well. And I think that it is the formation of BRICS. And mind you, BRICS now has so many countries that it takes 70% of the world's size. On the other hand, we have the Western alliance, which is the US plus Europe. Seeing BRICS making the counterweight to, let's say, NATO and the US, it makes perfect sense to me. And also they're aligning at the moment when the oppression of all of these countries is more visible than ever, thanks to social media. In some ways, BRICS are aligning on the principle of enemy of my enemy is my friend, which is enough for the time being. And of course, they are discussing the currency and what that would mean. And the West is downplaying that, if you ask me. US dollar or petrodollar depends on that oil from the Middle East. So if they would decide that this is now a new empire, because we have the Western Empire, which is obviously crumbling apart, and it's a huge wounded beast, so it will take a while and it will take down whomever on its way. On the other hand, the West is also very much neglecting the facts from these countries that we don't know so much about. We don't know much about China. We imagine it as horrible dictatorship where people don't have any rights and they make cheap products, which is not the case anymore, because all of the technology is being made in China. All of the oil that we are talking about Trump or any president of America is getting from the Middle East. I think it's just a natural reaction of the oppressed for so many centuries. We are talking from the bubble. We need to understand that we all live in the West. I live in a country which is not part of the European Union. Serbia comes to this global south all of a sudden. Also, the treatment of periphery countries in Europe is the same as we are some colonized countries, North Macedonia as well, Serbia as well, and primarily countries that are left out of the EU for the time being for a good reason. When we are talking about the human rights, and then we make this, like disclaimer that yes, there are no human rights in these countries, I don't see much of the human rights in Western countries. DiEM25 protested for the last 10 years for freedom of Assange, not to mention anything else. So let's not be so proud about this beacon of democracy and human rights and freedom of speech, because it's not. Our politicians and leaders are as equally dictators as some ruler of Dubai or United Arab Emirates or the King of Morocco. They were oppressed for so many decades and years, from Romans to Spanish, Portuguese. So I can understand their resentment, and I would totally understand why they would align to fight that West, which is still trying to oppress them and to have gain from their resources, cheap labor force, which leads us to migration, which is also enabled from the Western society with these high values. Because if we wouldn't produce and export wars to these countries, we would have less migrants. Sure, they would perhaps come for the better conditions of living or whatever, but they wouldn't be forced to leave their homes because they are left in rebel.
There's not one political leadership in the West where I'm like, oh, they're doing a great job. We have a super elitist, corrupt system that isn't obviously corrupt. That's the problem in the West. It all looks so like clean democracy and da da da, and it's not. There are a million things that come to my mind to Germany, and people would say, no, Germany is such a clean democratic state. Well, we are a small party. Why are we playing a role? Why don't we get platform? How is it democracy if the same three parties in Germany have all the attention, the biggest money, the biggest lobbyists, and everyone who's trying not to be a lobby party and corrupt has no chance? You have no chance to change this system. I don't think that Europe or the US has a higher moral whatever they think they are. For sure not. Even being in school, I was on the street protesting Bush at the time, which comes to my mind if people say like Trump is the worst president of the US. I'm like, there are plenty that come to my mind, by the way. But anyways, we're talking about that later. But neither am I agreeable with some of the governments or the systems that the BRICS country are having. I don't understand the Chinese system as well, but what I know is I would probably not like to live in China. And China is maybe even the example where everyone would agree on, right? But also with Russia and all the other countries. So they have the same problem. We have a worldwide problem of rotten government. So I think that's fair to say. But that has nothing to do with the people in those countries. And I think those are our allies. So my allies are people in the BRICS countries. I think the allies are our people. And when it comes to the governments, I want to hear what people are saying. Let's take, for example, India. I was thinking from what I'm seeing in the media that Modi was a decent president at the beginning. You know what I mean? Until people were like telling me, are you crazy? He is a right wing, da da da. And I was like, oh shit.
Probably neither of us would like to live in China or in Russia. However, what we need to understand is that that's capitalism, just Russian and Chinese way.
Yeah,
and to call
true,
it
yeah.
communism is just ridiculous. It used to be a communism. Now it's just some mutation of capitalism in a dictatorship way. but there's no talk. I mean, it's ridiculous to call it communism, and that's the main weapon of the US against these countries.
Of course, we have to talk about the US elections, although the world is talking about it. Trump won really big with all this promises that he's making to the world, bringing peace abroad and everything. Although we know and we still remember his last term, his administration and his leadership was chaotic, and he actually brought more division to the US than in the world than anything else. However, people somehow still buy into his promises.
We'll see from January what's happening, but I don't think it will be a lot different to what he did the first time. It will be just worse in many scenarios.
Well, if I could jump in again on that verse, I'm sure that both versions were catastrophic for the US, for the people of United States. As far as Europe, for example, or again, to scale it down to Serbia, I think that Trump might be better for the geopolitics, or at least an opportunity for Europe to move into this non-aligned course. That would be ideal, and that is of course something that DM is advocating for. But the previous president, what's his name?
Biden?
It's Biden.
Biden, yes. He started a war on his first day, and Trump even signed some treaties, peace treaties, and didn't start a new war. Yes, he made a huge step for Israel, acknowledging Jerusalem as the capital and not the capital, but moving the embassy to Jerusalem. So that was bad for that part of geopolitics and for the Palestinian cause. On the other side, he's not that interested in having his nose into every conflict there is, and he would probably end some of those in favor of the trade because he's a businessman before he is a politician.
We can here also talk about maybe Elon Musk voting for Trump and his role actually in the elections, because he played a crucial role as well here. On the one hand, he votes and talks about him in a good way. On the other hand, he talks about economic hardship and economic catastrophes that might be faced by the US people if he takes the leadership. So very controversial and paradoxical view. At the same time, he revealed these new humanoids. I think, I don't know what version was that, maybe the 16th version, but they looked like humans and walked like humans. Do we have a picture of that or a video, Juliana, here that we can share?
Yes, I think we have the video. Let's roll it.
I never bought the story that he is also a beacon of democracy when he buys X, and that is this democratic platform and whatnot, because as you said, Noir, it just showed during the elections how much he was meddling in that. And if there is a platform, X is that platform that can reach millions of people. Towards the end of campaign, I thought that his posts were really ridiculous. Like, he cannot be taken as a serious person looking at his political views. And on the other hand, this is the guy that plays with space, that has robots presenting to us and telling us to be nice to robots. I mean, how dystopian is this? Also, when we are talking about nature and environment, how do we get a Tesla? Where does the battery come from? Where does the lithium for that battery come from? And where is that battery going to be stored after a couple of years when it's dead? What about all of these Teslas going insane in the US this winter? Or, they just lock you in. You cannot get out. TikTok it. You will find a bunch of examples of crazy Teslas. Elon Musk is a very dangerous character, if you ask me. He is like, Marvel villain character. and him being just allowed to play with space is a nuts thing to think of again. A rich guy, not even a scientist, not, an NASA project, or, it used to be Russians launching Laika and Sputnik to space, and then NASA would do something better and so on. And now it's just a guy with a bunch of money. So how do we know that his launches and trials, let's not forget all of the tests, nuclear tests as well, but talking about his launches and rockets right now, how do we know that that doesn't affect nature? I am sure that there is a link, because you cannot just play with space and have no reaction on Earth. As far as I'm concerned, he can take his friends right now and launch themselves to Mars.
I'm predicting that Elon Musk will at some point run for president, 100%. He didn't do this for Trump. He did this campaigning for Trump for himself, because he needs policies to loosen the grip on restrictions for his experiments, right? That's basically the trade they made. He will go like, okay, it's forbidden right now under law for me to do this and that, and I helped you, now you help me, and this is basically what will happen. I read yesterday that potentially Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos are going to be consultants to Donald Trump, and I'm like, and those two people don't even like each other. So Bezos and Elon Musk have always been on different pages of the billionaire story, I guess. I don't know. But imagine what the presidency that will be. Consultants like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos. On the other hand, you have those evangelist, fundamentalist, extremist religious people who want to help Trump get Jesus back or something in the Middle East. Then you have an oil lobbyist. Then you have, like, I don't know, the worst of the worst sitting next to Trump in his next presidency. If those people consult you, there will be no boundaries anymore. I mean, the kind of stuff that Elon Musk will be able to do, also in regards, and this is harmless in my opinion with the robots, but what gives me more anxiety is his experiments with the brain and Neuralink. This is what that's not the popular part of what he's doing, but Neuralink is giving me the creeps. Together with his Starlink, you have the satellites, you have chips in the brains and so on, and it sounds super dystopian, but I think that if there is one person on this planet that can push for complete dystopian future, it's him. And now he's next to the president of the United States, so it's kind of a very, very scary scenario. On the other hand, I do get why people fall for him, to be honest, because there are no pioneers anymore in our times. And that's what I've been saying, to also criticize why these people have the upper hand, is because there is no pioneer spirit in the left at all. We are talking about new technology. We are talking about saving the climate. We're talking about a utopian future, but we have no pioneer spirit to present it to people. If we're talking about the future with peace and everything that we're presenting to people, it's not very inspiring. It's coming from a depressed space, like the world is shit, it would be better if. And then sometimes we use the Star Trek analogy to say to people, this is how we imagine it. And that's what Elon Musk is doing really well. Really well. He's really delivering on the part where he shows a future where you can believe that if he touches it, everything is possible. And I think that's why people fall for it. That's why he helped Trump. I think he helped him, because it could have been, oh, if he's with Elon Musk, I don't vote for him. But it was the other way around. That's my take on Musk, at least.
Yes, I'd like to add one more thing about this. I mean, the technology itself is still limited. What he's working on is the performance and the looks and the appearances of the technology itself, because technology is still distant from reaching, reasoning, thinking, producing real knowledge. And I'm trying to follow these news as part of my studies. However, the performance and imitating how humans talk and think, and this makes people somehow fascinated and inspired. However, These promises about the future, future prosperity, future solutions for all kind of problems, these are not even realistic. So yes, he is inspiring people, but the question is to what extent these promises are based on real grounds. And this is really problematic because, as you said, there are no people on the left who are doing the same. But again, can somebody do the same on false promises? That's another question. It's absolutely crucial to address what he's doing.
Just to go back to something that Noir said at the very beginning, this stigmatization of the activists or the environmental movements and so on. Same thing, I think, in this case, because activists didn't do themselves a favor. Being so radical in this cancel culture is what harmed the cause without repair. This is why the right, or Trump, as an example that we are talking about now, can say, yes, you are all freaks, and what you're going to do about it. Here we have an actual plan, or he didn't even promise that much, except deporting migrants, which is again another point of division amongst people. It's also this migration gray area is good for the economy because these people are working on low wages and they're out of the system, and unlike the narrative, they are not receiving the social benefits and so on the minute they cross the border. And also Musk appeals to people and to young people especially because he's this entrepreneur. He made his money, so now he can invest this money, which goes very much in line with the American dream. So this is American culture. It makes sense to me, and only, it spills over to the rest of the Western culture, which is Europe mostly. Left is not being inspiring. The left turned into cancel culture weirdos, unfortunately. This is what a common person, an ordinary person, would imagine when you say the left. Unfortunately, I think this is the point in time for the left.
This whole presentation he did with the robots and with the cars and whatnot. Afterwards, a lot of people who were there said there was people behind who were controlling them, like a child controls a toy car, right? So he's doing that. He's selling a technology that is not finished yet. So it's not there's not even a functioning prototype you can buy around the corner somewhere near in time. That's for the show because he needs more credit, right? So he gets more money. This is part of how those Silicon Valley and big billionaires accumulate more wealth, is through a promise and through people believing in them. Believing in Tesla plays a bigger role than buying Tesla, in Tesla being still alive, in my opinion. So he has to do these things, like the Cybertruck presentation. Cybertruck is not for the normal person. Why was this so important for him? Is to get the money that he needs to still fool around. Another topic that I'd like to, I like to have in here because I think it connects very well also to the US election is the whole P. Diddy story, which here in Europe and in Germany is not discussed as much. On one side, it does play a huge role to us, apart from hearing the music and watching the movies with all of these stars, but it's very impactful in the US. And when Kamala Harris started inviting a lot of these huge Hollywood stars on stage, from the music industry, like Beyonce and all of these people, she started losing a lot more support. When you looked online, people, especially at those videos, were all naming one name, and that's P. Diddy, right? Because like in the last time with Epstein, there's apparently a list of people who were involved in all these parties. So we have a short clip.
On September 16th, 2024, music mogul Sean Diddy Combs was arrested in New York City and charged with racketeering, trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, and transportation to engage in relations for money.
These are a lot of charges, right? And apart from people believing like, okay, What do extremely rich, spoiled people do in a party? Probably whatever they like. But the problem here is if you blackmail people, if you drug people, if you have minors there, that's then super illegal. I think nobody would care if a bunch of grown ups would meet and do whatever orgy they like to do in consent with each other. That would be none of our business, right? But what happened there, systematically happened there, and presumably also backed by big names in the label they worked for. It looks to me like a very strategic operation, because why would one person need to have so much power over so many celebrity friends, right? Maybe one or two, maybe you have competitors and you want to take them out or something. But this is so huge and this is so systematic that a lot of people believe that there is not just the labels, but there might be even a government involvement, like with Epstein. I think this is also part that crushed Kamala Harris's campaign big time, because she associated with herself with people who are part of this P. Diddy universe. But to not go so much into those things, the question is, there is this web of political, cultural intersection which is all once and the same. We know that the CIA, for example, produced movies pushing for military and so on, and they finance big productions to present the world like how great America is and how great the military is. So there's always been a connection between Hollywood and the government. I mean, if it falls apart from one side, maybe there is potential it falls apart completely. For me, the question is, do we see like the end of the Roman Empire? Do we see the end of the US empire as such? Um, with Hollywood crumbling, with so many superstars that were part of people's lives in the West for so many years, with this political, change from serious capitalists to clowns. How people are saying the whole US election has been quite an entertainment show. I think I laughed more about videos that I saw than I have seen something serious. That's the basic question: the fall of an empire unfolding for years now, with the signs being that a lot of these celebrities are crumbling and have no support or less support than they ever had. What's your take on it?
I think the Western civilization is falling apart. That's perfectly correct what you said. It's not just American empire. I think it's the end of the Western civilization, which peaked. If you look at the end of previous empires, it was when decadency was at this high level. And I think that as a society, we are at that level. So connection between the Hollywood and the deep state, CIA, FBI, anything with three initials and the gun, was always there. And it's not just CIA agents working on some movies, they are in the system of Hollywood and they are implementing these narratives into the scripts. Just to take Israel and that propaganda as an example, how many movies of Holocaust have you seen? How many movies about other side have you seen? None. Or Arabs are always depicted as the bad guys. How many movies of Saving Private Ryan kind you've seen, where you empathize with the main character, which is American soldier going to some country to kill? This is the way they pulled you in. What started with Weinstein and then progressed into Me Too movement was also part of the narrative, making this appearance of strong women coming out, speaking out, but that was also only a facade. Part of debunking that was Amber Heard and Johnny Depp trial, which was a display of how fake she was. And also, I think another genre that we will see more of these trials of the public, so to say. And also when we are coming to Diddy, I'm curious how this is going to be handled. Is it going to be a public trial, or on the contrary, it's going to be a very secretive one in order to hide all of these people, high-level names that are exposed or about to be exposed in these videos and so on, which is not just perverted people going to, whatever they feel like doing, but it's also another way of the deep state, the government, the Secret Service, call it as you wish, to hold these people in the palm of the hand. So they're being blackmailed to do things that are in favor of the government instead of doing what they would do normally. So this is how governments work. It's nothing special for the US, I think. It's just the level of perfection that the US achieved with it. And what the problem is now is that the production was better before, and their production is really out of touch. You can see it through the PR of Kamala because it was completely out of touch. And inviting Beyonce and I don't know whom else she invited, also giving $10 million to Beyonce, to a celebrity who is a billionaire already, of taxpayers' money to appear in her rally just in order to bring her fans to vote for her. It's ridiculous thinking. Whoever did her PR is really not in touch with the reality. So I'm curious to see how much is going to really appear with the Diddy scandal, or it's going to be put under the carpet like the Epstein case, which is also it's awful, it's horrible, and those are the people who are supposed to be authorities, not just actors, musicians. That's a different industry, but we are talking about the elites in general and politicians as well.
Thank you, Ivana, for wrapping up this P. Diddy topic. It's worth looking at these things because it's culture is a big part of our society, which plays into politics and into people's awareness. It has been fun to do this first episode with you. Thanks, Ivana, for being our first guest. Thanks, Noor, for starting this experimental new format with me that will be up monthly. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you have any news, if you have anything, any video or something that is interesting to you, you can just send it to us. Please be part of this. If you send us things, we can look at it and maybe speak about them in the next show with then another guest.
And I want to thank Ivana for sharing her experience and for being with us, for accepting to be with us on the first episode. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. It was really a pleasure, and I had a great time.
See you next time.